Yeah, the book, it is being proofread. So it's been edited twice, and now it's being proofread and formatted. So as soon as that process is finished, we'll get it off to the publishers. But it's quite big, it's a lot of pages, and therefore it's taking quite a while. Jeremy's edited it. He's then asked me to edit the bits that he didn't understand. Then he's re-edited it. Now it's being proofread, and therefore also edited from any proofreading stuff. And now it's being formatted. So I think there's 10 chapters, and I think 4 of them have been proofread and formatted.
I guess I'll just ask you, is there anything unusual that you have seen from the Lord in terms of the direction of Ukraine, COVID?
I was thinking that same thing.
Cultural insanity in both of our countries.
No, I mean, end of the day, I see it in a bigger, all these things are going on, and there's all sorts of things happening around the world. But what's the bigger picture? What is God doing? How is this? And there are lots of different ways of looking at that. For me, I still look at what God is doing to draw people to sonship and get them into a flow of life. And particularly, I think, understanding, the 4 streams that are coming together. I still see that happening, and I still see people being awakened from one stream to realize that actually all these things work together. So, the realize the eschatology and Christian universal stream or restoration stream, and then the sort of energy healing frequency, that type of stream, and then the mystic stream. And I do see that, people are beginning to awaken, but then people also entrench, they defend their position and sort of almost like can't see the obvious. When everything's obvious when you see it, isn't it? But when you can't see it, it's not obvious. So for me, when I discovered what Jesus was talking about was the end of the age and not the end of the world, and therefore what he was talking about Gehenna was about the end of the age and not the end of the world, it's like, oh, these things fully come together. This makes sense. And the same thing, I think a lot of people are discovering God is love, and they're really finding it difficult to reconcile, therefore, the God of the Old Testament and the Old Covenant version of God, as if there was 2. But then the Bible presents it almost as if there's 2, and therefore it's quite hard for them. And the pendulum of that seems to have swung too far for me. And a lot of those people are now almost trying to interpret the Bible in a purely figurative and sort of analogy type of way. And there's no literal aspect to it in their understanding. And I think, no, there's history here. It may be presented in a way that misrepresents it, but there was a King David, there was a King Solomon, there were things that happened. Yes, the way they wrote it misrepresented God, and Jesus came to put them right and show them what God was really like by saying, well, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And his whole focus was love. So I think Jesus sort of came and sort of changed that whole perspective for them, but I think those that are on that path, they're now denying the reality of evil, the reality of angels, fallen angels, any of it, as a spiritual dimension. And it's all in the mind. So all of the Bible is all about the conquest of our mind, or our becoming aware. And when I think, no, that's not what it's about. Yes, there's an aspect of that, but that's sort of cutting it short. But I realized that those people have not yet had a mystic experience. They've not yet had an encounter in heaven, or with an angel, or with a fallen angel, or with God face to face. So they're using their intellectual understanding, trying to explain the Bible. And because they've made it figurative and symbolic in this area, now they're doing it for all of it, and I think that isn't sort of part of their journey, I guess, but not something I would encourage people to get into. And when you've had a mystic experience and you've encountered love, then it's really easier to see some of the other things, but that's not the way some people have come. So I do see those 4 streams are still working. God is still working within them. And I do believe they're coming to a position where there is an integral way of looking at the whole to see that it's, a union of relationship with God and everything else. So that's one area I still see happening. I see another area where there are 3 things that I think God is deconstructing people from. One is the religious spirit and the religious systems and their religious doctrinal views. The other is the political system, and the other is the financial system. And I see that as part of the kingdom, bringing about a reality of the truth, rather than the deception of being stuck in religious system or a financial system. And if we're going to see the kingdom established on earth as in heaven, then we're not going to operate in a worldly financial way. So we've got to transition out of, not just the brokenness of the financial system or the financial control that has through that system over the world and everything else, including all the wars and the media. And so I see that financial control system operating through the opposite of God's kingdom, which is, division and, competition and conflict and warmongering and tribalism. So I see that happening, and God is unveiling and revealing that this is going on, which then opens up the door also for the political system, because that's what also operates division and competition and tribalism, or nationalism, let's call it, in that instance, which is what you've got going on in Ukraine, Russia, with this national perspective of competition and warmongering. Same thing, really, under a political guise. So I do believe God is awakening people to the failure of the political and financial systems to be able to establish, certainly the kingdom of God on earth, but anything positive, really, when it comes to when it becomes conflict and tribalism or nationalism and defending ourselves against others and all of that. And then you have the religious deconstruction, which is going on, revealing the true nature of God and setting people free from the way, well, basically, I think it's from the law, really, or an old covenant mindset about God. And I just see that deconstruction for me has just gone even deeper, to realizing that so much of what I thought was just normal Christianity was actually old covenant religion. And we've applied a lot of old covenant religion to the new covenant, which it didn't need to have. Therefore, the eschatology of the end of the old and the transition, what the New Testament describes, and a lot of what was written to help them understand what was going on in the persecution from the religious spirit and the political spirit, because that's what they were facing. I think that is, again, people are being awakened to have a different perspective to the Bible and to who God is and to who Jesus is as the real word of God. And therefore, the bondage to doctrine and theology and the religious spirit is because we have a Bible, mostly. If it wasn't the Bible, we wouldn't have that deception. It wouldn't be there. It is. So a lot of that, I think, is also being revealed, and people are realizing that for the first 385 years, the gospel and the good news of Jesus spread throughout the whole world, basically. And then they got a book and entered into the Dark Ages. Well, I don't think it was any coincidence that they got a book and entered into the Dark Ages, because it put the light under a basket, hid it. It was no longer a city on a hill open for everyone to come in because their gates were never shut. It was now a religious system controlled by a hierarchy and priests, and using a book that no one could read. And in reality, most people didn't read it anyway, because if you look at the literacy rates in the 1st century AD, I think it was like 5 or 10% who were literate throughout the world. So to be honest, even the letters that were written,
You pretty
probably
much had to be, you
rich
pretty much
than
had to
that.
be, you had to be wealthy to be
Yeah.
educated. The average person did not read.
Nope. And therefore, they had to have something read out to them. Now, of course, you couldn't read the Bible out to them because they couldn't actually speak Latin or understand Latin. So that closed the whole thing down even more. So I can see that that awakening is taking place where God is awakening people from the evangelical fog of being dependent on sola scriptura and everything's about the Bible, and that the Bible is the word of God, and the Bible, you know, that they had from the beginning. Well, they didn't have it until 385 AD. And even after that, it took a long time to get to the point where people could read it in their own language. Because even when it was produced in English and other languages, most people still couldn't read. Yeah. You know, it's like we put this whole thing on people able to read the Bible for themselves, when for most of history, they haven't. So the Holy Spirit has still been speaking to people, hence, you know, the mystic traditions and, you know, those that were hearing God and weren't subject to all of that stuff and did have truth. But their truth was still somewhat based in the leaders of that did have a Bible, and they used the Bible to indoctrinate their groups to what their view of the Bible was. Only really those who really just heard God for themselves were truly following what Jesus said. You know, you can hear my voice, you know, and now we went through the whole stage of it becoming absolutely, totally dependent on the Bible with the Protestant Reformation and, you know, on into evangelicalism. Now I think God is deconstructing all that and bringing us back to the simplicity of, hey, I'm here and I am speaking and you just listen. We can have a relationship and we don't have to have a relationship through this book, you know, and it's like, well, why read a biography or an autobiography about someone when you can actually talk to them? You know, it's ridiculous when you think of it. It's like, oh, I'm in my sitting room and there's someone sitting there and I'm reading the book of their life that they wrote or that someone else wrote about them, which would have been open to interpretation. So rather than asking them the questions myself. So I think God is bringing it back. So a lot of deconstruction around these things is taking place in preparation for a transition to a established kingdom on earth as it is in heaven, which isn't going to operate by the financial system or the political system or any other tree of the knowledge of good and evil system. It is going to operate on heaven on earth, operating under a completely different thing, covenant, but true covenant in the new covenant where all the promises of God are realized in Jesus and we're all included, you know, which is essentially, and then actual covenant is we're here to bless each other. You know, what's mine is yours, what yours is mine. We're blessing each other, and therefore we don't put a portion value on people according to how much money they earn or how much money they've got, which is what that materialistic system is. And how happy you are is dependent on how much you've got. We've got to get people free from that financial system of their worth and value being commodified, you know, and the commodification of life and people and their identity, that is not who God is and who God says they are. So all of that, I think, is coming about. And I think that will eventually bring people out of the bondage to functioning in the world under the world system to being in the world and operate under the kingdom. And it will be very different, but I don't see it as a revolution where there's going to be anarchy and chaos, because God doesn't operate that way. So there's transition. So people will be illuminated and become consciously aware, and their consciousness will expand and they will begin to live differently. And then they will establish people in relationship with one another who will live differently. And then they will be a model for others who can live differently, and we'll be weaned off all of the systems of the world, which will be shaken and will fall. And I see a lot more shaking to take place. You know, not that that shaking is a fulfillment of Hebrews 12, but it is, God still continues to do things as he's done in the past, but there's not just a biblical fulfillment. It's just God does shake things to bring things to a point of this is what is good and this what isn't. So
Well, that's probably what it takes to get our attention.
Yeah, it does, because we tend
really,
to,
realistically speaking, it usually takes a calamity to get us to finally pay attention. And I was listening to someone speaking, and they felt that some of the craziness that is going on right now in the culturally throughout the world, but specifically between our two countries, is that you have a couple generations that have really had it good. They've not really had to, like my parents who went through the Depression, the Second World War, probably your folks, that went through real stringent, rough times. I mean, like when I talk to people, even my son-in-law, and said, you know, I remember the time when your mortgage rate was 19% if you had good credit. And he just sort of looked at me. I said, or, you know, we had to sit in lines, and depending on your license plate, it told you which day of the week you could go buy gas, and you could buy 10 gallons at a clip. If that wasn't enough, you had to get back to the end of the line and hope that when you made it up to the pump again, there was still gas. Well, they look at us like,
yeah, how
did you survive? Well, the fact is you do, but they've never really had some of the things that previous generations went through. The fact that life a lot of times was not all that easy. It was difficult, and that so when you don't have, you know, anything bad that you went through, you have to manufacture a reason as to why you're so oppressed or why life is so bad. But the two questions I did want to ask you once you get done is, one's going to be probably pretty quick, the other one will take a little more time. The quick one is, how's the third book coming along? And then the longer question is, when the New Age refers to chakras, which of course you don't use that term, it's more just forces of energy. How would you describe it? How do you implement it in your life? The real nuts and bolts of it.
Yeah. Well, the first question, the book, it is being proofread. So it's been edited twice, and now it's being proofread and formatted. So as soon as that process is finished, we'll get it off to the publishers. But it's quite big. You know, it's a lot of pages, and therefore it's taking quite a while. You know, Jeremy's edited it. He's then asked me to edit the bits that he didn't understand. Then he's re-edited it. Now it's being proofread, and therefore also edited from any proofreading stuff. And now it's being formatted. So I think there's 10 chapters, and I think 4 of them have been proofread and formatted. So we're still working through
so
that.
Compared to the other 2 books, this one will actually be much bigger.
Yeah, I mean, the last one was fairly big, but I think it was 649 A4 pages, and then they've got to be turned into 9 by 7 pages.
Well, so, but the software, all things considered, the software does that pretty quickly.
Oh yeah, but
you just drop it in and it formats it. Yeah,
so probably there's going to be more than 600 pages.
Yeah, okay.
And I did think about writing 2 books, but I didn't feel that I could leave the first one and people hanging without the conclusions, because it would be like, you're not going to get the full picture of this until you read the whole thing. So I thought, well, now I'm just going to do it, and it is what it is. It will be as big as it is. So, and it's not it isn't a book which is purely testimony, although I do share testimony in it. There is research, and there is history, and there is analysis of the past and the processes and how things have happened in the world and why they've happened in the world, and particularly when it comes to how we've got to believe what we did and been deceived, and what is behind the opposite agenda to God's kingdom, and how has that actually affected and deceived us into becoming passive and bailing out on being an effective agent for change in the world, rather than, you know, what we've become, you know. So yeah, it's a lot in it, and it will upset quite a few people. Not that that was my intention, but I do have to challenge the things which they don't see within the context of eschatology, and therefore how this all works, because it isn't, you know, I mean, eschatology in itself is an oxymoron. I've used the word in the title as a reflection of this is a stupid title, because you can't have the end if there's no end to the increase of God's government and peace. The restoration of all things, there's not an end in, well, it could be, okay, we'll get to phase 1 or whatever, but then we go on, so effectively, it is quite a complex issue around how did we get here? How has this affected our understanding of the restoration of all things? But how is this help us understand how the world is and how that is likely to change or needs changing? So it does go into, how sort of the eschatology leads into obviously rapture and millennium and Zionism and all of that, which then challenges, well, what was behind that and what was the agenda for the same issue that started at Babel? Well, we're going to make a name for ourselves and we're creating this thing, in that name, which is essentially one world system, so where in history, where's that happened? How is that now? We've seen that. Where are we in it now? But the last chapter has got 140 odd pages in it, so which is a book, I know, but I had to finish on, well, what role of the sons of God got to play in establishing the restoration of all things, which is very positive, and that does have loads and loads of testimony of our governmental stuff and the cosmos and engaging in restoration and all of the things that is very positive about it. But initially, I do have to challenge, I think the deception of the Hebrew roots movement in drawing people back under the old covenant, and I know some people will be quite upset about that. Some of my friends will be quite upset about that, but at the end of the day, it's all part of the same deceptive system, and when you see it, and that then goes into, the Jewish mysticism, which is like, Jewish mysticism is old covenant mysticism. It's never intended to be in the new covenant. Not saying there may be some elements of truth in it, but do you really want to be going to that to get your truth? And so I do challenge the Kabbalah and all of that stuff, because I just think people are bought into something without having much discernment into where this stuff comes from and what's its ultimate agenda and who was behind it. So not everyone's going to be happy with that, as you can imagine. But
at least on Twitter, you probably won't be canceled if Elon Musk has his way.
Yeah,
you'll be able to say whatever you want.
But at the end of the day, I don't want people to read it who actually will be offended by it. I want people to read it who are open to be challenged for the deconstruction process that we're all in, and to become part of, the sonship in terms of restoration. So I don't want people to read it who are going to be offended by it, because if they are offended by it, then they're not in the place yet on their journey that's going to be useful for them.
But on the other hand, sometimes just a little taste of that, and I'll use an example. This was many, many years ago. Back when we lived in Florida, a friend of ours gave us Fred Price's book. And I can't even remember the title of it now. And he had read it and he handed it to us and he thought, what do you think about this? And I started to flip through a few pages and I said, out the door. Fast forward a couple years when we actually started so we thought, well, let's just listen to this guy. And when we sat there and listened to him, we said, a lot of things that he says really do make a whole lot of sense. He's not really out there in left field like I thought he was. Well, then when I sat down and read the book, after hearing what he really said, as opposed to being told what he would say, all of a sudden I was open to say, okay, let me sit down and read this, because this is him speaking, to have an open mind to it. But I went through it that first time and threw it away and said, oh, heresy, 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 can't do it. So sometimes it takes that little bit of a seed to get planted. Yeah. It takes a while to germinate, that when you are ready to be open to hearing it, you have to almost be challenged and, sort of get a smack in the face to say, well, I don't agree with that, to make you realize, well, wait a minute, there's something else out there. So
yeah, Well,
I understand your point, but on the other hand, sometimes we have to be shocked to make us begin to think, oh, maybe I don't have all
yeah.
the answers.
So long as the shocking is people are in that place where the right sort of shock actually shocks them into the right sort of action,
Yeah.
rather than them just getting really, really angry and upset and then sort of not really looking at what the rest of the book says, because
Yeah.
that's what some people do. It's like they'll agree with 90%, but they'll throw all that out because of the 10% they don't agree with.
Yeah.
If they get angry over it. So I just want to legislate for the right people to hear it, you know, and to be able to read it, and we'll go from there. So, but it is,
Okay.
it will be out. It will be out. It will be out this year, but it's going to be, you know, still a little while because it's still got to go through the final stages before it does.
Okay. So getting back to energy and
Yeah, energy. Okay.
and how the difference between what the New Age would call a chakra, what you call energy, how do you use it as opposed to what the New Age would tell you this is what you're supposed to do?
Okay. Well, I like the way that Mark Verkler was asked the question, and he answered the question with, well, we've got a blood system, we've got a lymph system, we've got a nervous system. Why wouldn't we have an energy system? And actually, there's nothing wrong in thinking, why wouldn't God have an energy system within us? So that's how I would look at it and say, look, you know, forget the terminology. And I don't have a problem using chakra from the point of, well, it's just a Sanskrit word, which really means spinning disk of energy, really. But obviously the connotation for sort of evangelicals particularly, well, that's all New Age. Well, so much things, the New Age have taken things which have truth in them and they've twisted the truth and then used their own version, which has usually left God out of it, you know, left a personal, intimate relationship with God out of it, in which they're then presenting things as concepts, which may be true, but they're not then related to personal relationship with God, which is what the energy system is all about. So within us, we have 7 energy gates, which are related to the physical body, but where the spirit and soul are connected together in our innermost being. So when I first looked at the gateways of spirit, soul, and body, the body gates were very much about the way we perceive the world. So they were our 5 senses, the way the body actually tastes, touches, sees, hears, smells, all of that, which is very much a physical manifestation of how we engage the world around us. And that, although I could see most of what we've learned from the world has come in through those gateways. You know, that's how our soul has been programmed from the outside in. And I was thinking, oh, so I need my soul deprogramming from all the information I've received from the outside in that has not come through the correct filter of my spirit. So then I would look, okay, so things are, how do I relate to the world then? Well, I need to relate to the world through my spirit. So my spirit still needs to filter the information I'm seeing and put it into the right context and perspective, which is a spiritual perspective coming from God, effectively, God's perspective on the world, not what I've been taught or seen. So that was sort of how I got there. And then it was like, okay, there's rivers of living water flowing from our innermost being. So I have my first love gate. I'm opening that to allow the river of life to flow in me, energy to flow in me, life to flow in me, the spirit to flow in me. I want them to be fully flowing through my whole being. How does that work? So I had the river of life flowing into the garden of my heart and flowing from the garden of my heart around this process of the dance floor and the soaking room and the bridal chamber, which are sort of a description of intimacy and revelation of my identity, you know, and I didn't term them that, but that's what they were. You know, I just had the experiences that I went on this dance floor and it was like I danced with God and I stepped on this sort of checkerboard floor, and when I stood on certain things, it was like it was illumination, you know, and it's like, wow, you know, and then I'm in the soaking chamber of being transformed and softened by the oils of God's frequency, Now I can frame it now in a way which I didn't have the language then to frame it that way, but I had the experiences. So I went through these cycles, and then the bridal chamber of coming into a deeper level of intimacy, you know, a consummation of relationship, of being one spirit and in union and oneness with the Father, which now I've got terms for the experience I had, but I couldn't frame it quite. So eventually then, well, the river of life is flowing. Where does it go? Well, it goes through me out into the world around me. So then it was like, well, I'm expanding my spiritual boundary outside of my body. My spirit is in heaven now. So this is the construct of my spirit where actually life is. So actually that life needs to come through me, because Jesus said rivers of living water would flow from your inner man. And he was talking about the spirit, you know, but what spirit? Holy Spirit, my spirit, both in one, because I'm one spirit. So it all started to sort of make a little bit more sense. But I didn't really understand it. I was just realizing there was more to this than I first recognized by just looking at spirit, soul, body gates. So eventually I got to the point where I was looking at this rivers of living water. I'm opening my first love gate, my relationship with God, energy, life, it's all flowing, it's flowing. I'm expanding my boundaries. I'm creating an atmosphere of love around me from that flow, because it began to be that the river of life was flowing with love, joy, and peace. So I was entered into rest by being filled with love, joy, and peace. You know, and that was sort of starting to live loved and love living and live loving, and all of that started to be encompassed. And then it got to the point where, okay, all that God was asking me to do, I was activating the energy to be able to do it. So I have all that I need to be able to do everything that I'm called to do every day. And so I operated out of the fullness of everything I needed. And so I never ran out of energy. I could go on for hours and do whatever I needed to do. But I didn't know how. I just chose to agree with that. So then the Father started to show me my innermost being. You know, what is the core of my being, where spirit, soul, and body are connected to him in a oneness? Because I began to engage in my first love gate with Father, Son, and Spirit, with my spirit, and then sort of my soul, as things flowed from spirit to soul, after my soul and spirit got separated, reintegrated, then all of the influence of what was programming me, if you like, or reprogramming me and deprogramming me and deconstructing me, was coming from inside out. So it was coming out of heaven in relationship with Father, Son, and Spirit, which then began to impact my soul and then my body. So how does this work with my body? And then, of course, immortality, living in fullness of health, living in fullness of energy, not running out, my cells of my body not running down. All of this started to be something I began to get revelation of. So how does that work? So the Father really used the river and rivers of living water as the analogy for me, so that what I found at the core of my being was the Merkaba. So I found at the core of my being, there was this hub where the energy of the river of life went through a process where it then was able to energize my whole being. And so I saw it like a turbine, like a hydroelectric power station. The river of life would flow out of heaven. It would flow through my spirit, soul, into this place where my body and soul and spirit were together in one whole place, my innermost being. And I was energized, but I didn't understand at that point that I was energized in a specific way. I just thought, ooh, I've got all this energy. And the Merkaba also was a communication array. So it had portals but connected to where my spirit was from the inside. So then I discovered I didn't have to go through an external portal into the realms of heaven. I'm connected to heaven because my spirit is dwelling there, remaining there. And I became multidimensional and realized I can be in multiple places doing multiple things because I'm not linear. And so I'm not tethered by time. So all this stuff started to make sense, and it all came together in, I'm quantumly entangled on the inside of me to wherever I am through portals. And actually there are portals there that enable me to engage the cosmos, the dimensions from the inside. Without having to think about, I've got to travel, I can instantly be connected to wherever. That communication is two-way. My soul is communicating with my spirit is communicating with my soul. There is just a continual flow of life that's happening. And then I think the Father then took it another step to show me how to choose to activate the energy, the type of energy I needed. So then that's when I was shown the 7 energy gates and the way those 7 energy gates functioned and what they were, and then how there were 3 of those gates, which were the core gates of the government of my life. So that was the crown and the heart and the root. That connected me to creation in a grounding sort of way. It opened up my whole being, where I am in the middle, and then also connected me to the spiritual dimension in that way. And then that then was the core. And then I activated the other energy gates. Those energy gates are always active. So then the energy that was coming through the Merkaba activated my heart, and my heart activated my head or my crown, my spiritual senses, and also connected me to creation. So I became very creation orientated and felt the groaning and all of creation's emotions through this energy. And then the other gateways, I learned to activate according to what I needed each day. So if I'm going to be doing a lot of preparation work, creative work, then I'll activate the creative energy gate center, within sort of my loins, if you like, that area. And then if I'm going to be doing a lot of speaking or talking to people, then I'm going to activate the area in my throat, which needs activating. So then each of those, I would sense what needed activating, and then I would energize the ones that I needed. And very rarely did I ever need to re-energize anything, because I was just in union or communion with the Father. So I'm only going to do what I see him doing. But a couple of times he took me into experiences that drained all of my energy, because they were engaging fallen angels or engaging dimensions, and I wasn't expecting to. And he took me there, and it was everything I'd received was given out, and I'm empty. So I quickly learned how to make sure that I could re-energize and reactivate a lot of energy. And these energy gates operate exponentially. So it's like they don't operate one in an addition or a multiplication. They operate in an exponential sense. So you have, 2, 4, 16, 2, 5, 6, multiplied up. So if you had all 7 energy gates fully operating, you're operating in the trillions of energy, whatever that, it's not in joules, obviously, but let's say some sort of spiritual energy measure. It's like, now I've been with Nancy Cohen when she got triggered and energized, and literally she has to run out of the room. She had literally, she'll blow machine equipment. She spikes with energy, particularly if she has some sort of encounter. She spikes the energy, and I'm next to her feeling, and she's running. Now I had exactly the same trigger, but I'd learned to expend my spirit and create a bigger sphere for that energy to dissipate around me or to be used around me. So I didn't spike. I didn't spike with energy like that. I was able to absorb the energy and use it effectively. So I'm standing there. People wouldn't even know that I'm energized, but inside I'm able to dissipate the energy in a way which didn't spike, because I sort of learnt the process of what this was all for and how it could be focused into specific areas. And so then each day I live in that continual energy activation, and it's become a state of being. So I don't now have to think about which gate do I need to activate today? Do I need more of this energy, this energy? I am living in that state of becoming, I'm consciously aware. So my mind now is not focused in alpha waves, beta waves, gamma waves, delta waves, theta waves. It's just aware, conscious of all of them at all the same time, where I learned to activate. We all operate in beta waves, but alpha waves, slowing everything down, becoming more mindful, and then drawing from the spiritual realm through theta waves, and therefore activating gamma waves at a high level. I mean, I learned how to do all that individually, then I just became it. So I don't have to think about it anymore. Whereas before I went through all the processes to energize myself, river flowing, focused into these spheres. They're all activated, spinning up. That is flowing through me, creating a bubble of love around me, and I can live in all that. I was doing that as a conscious process. Now it is who I am. So now I don't have to go through all of those formats and formulations and things. I just live that way. So I am energized, and every energy I need is available whenever I need it, without me consciously having to do it, because now it's a state of conscious awareness. So I live in the realms of heaven. I don't visit the realms of heaven unless I engage it consciously. Most of the time, I don't need to, so it's become a state of being that is, I think, how we are intended to be as sons. So we live in a communion with the Father and the Son and the Spirit, and with creation. And in life, we're in a state of conscious awareness, an awakened state, heightened state, state of oneness and union, fellowship, whatever way you want to describe it, which is a state of being. And I don't do it anymore. I don't have to do it. I am it, which frees up so much more time to enjoy life. It's like I celebrate life. It's so joyful that I can actually be creative in life without having to, I've got to do this, got to do that, got to do the other. I've got time for everything. Everything I want to do and desire to do, I've got time for. Now I can expand and contract time if I need to. If ever I got to a point where I needed more time at this, or less, I can do that. And I still have the supernatural way of choosing realities and doing all that. But now I'm in this state of awareness of being in the light of God's presence, face to face, in the light realm, in eternity. Well, it's in the realm of perfection. It feels like everything is as it should be. Therefore, that is what directs me to action, to make sure everything in my life is as it is, as I'm in the presence of the Father in that realm of light. And it's a state of bliss, really. I mean, Justin would call it bliss, but I dwell there. I remember him describing when he was there for 5 minutes, and it like radically contrasted the rest of his life, and I've learned to be there in that realm continually. So everything now is just being, although I did learn how to do all those things in an activated way. Now I don't have to do it because it's who I am. So I am continually activated and connected.
When you talk about energy, does that also equate to a degree to frequency? And the reason that I ask is when David Van Kooven was alive, we got to know him. And I remember them talking about that whenever he went into a hotel, his wife had to keep him away from vending machines and ice machines because he could walk past them and not do anything.
Yeah.
But he could wind up wrecking the machine just because of whatever was coming, whatever he was releasing, even unconsciously. He wasn't doing anything consciously, but because of the frequency that he emanated.
Well, in a sense, rivers of living water is energy, it's frequency, it's vibrating light. You know, I use the river thing because it works for me for hydroelectric energy and turbines and creating energy in fields. But in reality, it's not actual water, is it? And it's energy, it's light. And therefore I can connect to light in a creative way, and light responds to me in sonship, and light collapses wave functions into realities I choose. Now, when we say frequency, we mean a vibrating energy source. So yes, it is, but David Van Kouveren didn't know how to control it because he didn't understand the Merkaba or any of that stuff. He just had an affinity for it, and it was part of who he was, but I don't think he knew how to control it.
Well, he understood the whole concept of laser light and light frequency. He understood that, but he understood it from the scientific point of view and what it could do.
Yes, and he did have insight into popping a quiff and choosing realities and that and beginning to manifest. He had insight into things, but not at the level that he'd experienced that in the Merkaba or the gates within him and that stuff. So it was active in him, you know, and probably more active in him than in others because of his calling and his destiny and who he was. And he could fix things also by focusing that. So he learned to focus it to fix things, I think, eventually. So yes, people will use different terminology for different things. And yes, I think it is a frequency in that we operate at a high level of frequency, therefore we're living on a higher plane of conscious awareness. I mean, different ways of describing it, using different terms, and depending on where you've come from, you'll probably use different terms to describe the same thing, and they're really sort of talking about the same thing really, but people use different expressions in doing that. But definitely for me now, it's the way, it's who I am, and I think that sense of my identity as a son of God and as light, and you know, myself having a vibrating frequency which is resonating with the Father's heart, so I'm not operating at a frequency which is independent. Also, I think the whole planet itself, as people are awakening, its frequency is rising, therefore Schumann's frequency is spiking, and I think people will become more enlightened, therefore their frequency will be higher, therefore they will start living in health and immortality because their whole body will be operating at a frequency. Obviously, we talk about essential oils having a very high frequency, but also emotions have a very high frequency or a very low frequency. And you can affect your physical body, whether you live in love, joy, or peace, or whether you live in disappointment, bitterness, or resentment, or unforgiveness, because they will generate frequencies which are negative or toxic to the body or the mind. So it's a whole body experience, and it's sort of a wholeness, an integrated awareness of where we're one, and we're designed to be one and in one and one in us, you know, in a way which is sort of really very real, but becomes the way you live rather than a series of things you do.
Yeah.
I think when people get to that state, they will live in that state of conscious awareness and being able to choose aligned to the Father's heart all the time, without necessarily having to go through, you know, it's like, you know, you put up a whole load of scaffolding to build a house, but once the house is built, you live in it. You don't have the scaffolding up anymore. So a lot of the things I learned were scaffolding. Now I live in the house that helped me build. So that is who I am now. And I don't necessarily go through the processes I would have done to get to discovering who I am, but they're automatic. They've become subconscious. No, they become unconscious. So they're part of the, if I think, rather than they're not programmed into my hard drive or in my random access memory, they're in my read-only memory now, like breathing. I don't have to, my body, my mind does not have to tell my body to breathe. It is programmed into my being to breathe. And the being, having this awareness of who you are, is programmed into read-only memory, and it's not affected by things that happen in conscious memory or things that are programmed in the hard drive of our heart, because they are then as a deeper level of programming that then affects all the others. You know, the other, what I know in my heart and what I think in my mind are from that basic read-only memory, which is actually the input-output system of my life. You know, talking in computer speak, you know, it's like if you didn't have the ROM memory, your computer could not work Windows or iOS or whatever. That is what gives it, you can communicate with this operating system, because this is the basic communication system of life. Yes, it gets outworked in a practical way through your actual life, you thinking of yourself as an operating system, and then that actually then triggers how you think to actually bring things about, you know, how you then speak and how you act and everything else. But really it's at a real deep level that becomes, this is who I am, which is pretty awesome, really. I mean, it's like amazing when you get to that point, and I'm sure there's more for me to discover in it all, but I so enjoy this whole state of being, because I've got so much more available time for enjoyment rather than duty or obligation or stuff I used to have to do. You know, even good stuff I used to have to do, I still had to do it. Now I am it, you know, and I've got all of that multiple stuff going on all the time that I'm connected to. And, you know, I'm doing things right now that I'm no conscious awareness of, but I could become consciously aware any second. But even though I'm not consciously aware, you know, I know that now, it is still feeding into the background awareness of my life. And that's why someone asked me a question and I answer them. I've never answered it before, never even knew the answer, but the answer has already been prepared for me through what I am doing, who I am in that realm as a son, that actually is communicated into me and only became cognitive at the moment that I accessed it. Because I was accessing not memories, I was accessing knowledge at a deeper level through experience, because I've experienced it all. It's not intellectual knowledge, it's experiential knowledge that sometimes I don't even know that I have until I access it, and then I'm become aware. But it's great, you know, it really is a whole different way of just being. You know, God described himself as I am that I am, you know, and it's like, well, I am within I am that I am, you know, and I am that I am is within me. So you have this amazing relationship of how we can be in him and he's in us and he's in everything, and therefore we're connected to everything. And when we can actually engage where we are designed to be connected, and that's where our destiny then means we're not subject to being manipulated into doing something that other people want us to do, and only doing what we know is the Father's heart, which is an instinctive thing that's within the relationship that's being developed, which is awesome, really. I mean, it is a beautiful place to be, and it's total rest. You know, all the striving has gone out of it, all the works has gone out of it. It's just a place of total rest, trust, intimacy, oneness, union with Father, Son, and Spirit, and the connection to each other. So I look at people and see they're my brothers and sisters. We're one family. And I look at the world and see we're one family, even though it doesn't look like it. The people And that means the people who are in Russia, the people who are in Ukraine, the people who are leading Ukraine and Russia, they're still my family, and they're part of God's family. They're all his children, and they may be doing things that totally do not reflect their father and being made in his likeness and image, but they still are, and he still loves them, and he still died for them and reconciled them, and they are still part of his family. They just don't know it yet. And they may be operating at a total lost identity, but I can still love them and choose to forgive them and bless them, because I see who they are. I see that they are children of light, and there is light in them, even though it may be pretty much shielded by a whole lot of other stuff, usually brokenness and fragmentation and trauma and other things that people have gone through, but they're not beyond restoration. And that could happen in this life. It could happen, when they leave this dimension. But I still believe that God will want to restore them, even, and let them know that they're forgiven, and to know that he loves them, which is, it means you look at the world differently.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, well, I'm done asking my questions.
Okay, well, I know it's only a few questions, but that's, it's a good question. And I think it encompasses so many different aspects of what come together to make you whole.
I mean, between David Vancouver and you, that's where we really got, I guess, really introduced into the whole concept of the benefits of frequency. And so because of you, we now have 2 spooky 2s and a Hiwi. And all I can say is that I with bone spurs and arthritis, using frequency has been a whole lot easier on my body and more effective than just taking a medication that at times can be really detrimental to your system.
Yeah.
To say it works, and hey, it's a whole lot easier on the body, which all makes sense in terms of how God put things together.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It is a whole balanced, harmonious system at multiple levels, within us, fractals, and even within systems within us, all operate the same way in a harmonious union, oneness. And we're that with creation and the solar system and all the other things. It's just beautiful when you start to see that connection. And then the motivation to see it fully restored to how God intends it to be, just like, wow, yeah, there's just, how awesome is it going to be when everything is in its right place, balance, harmony, and we're part of that harmonious song.
And evidently Nikola Tesla had, I don't know if he had the whole picture, but he got the key that if you really wanted to understand everything, those were was it light, energy, and frequency, or the 3 things? If you know that, you would understand everything about creation, and that really does make sense.
Oh, it does, yeah, totally, yeah. And and now we're connected to it, which is wonderful. So yeah. All right, okay, well, I'm going to leave it there. Hi everyone, we're starting a Patreon page, patreon.com/freedomarc. And we would like to invite you to partner with us in taking the message of God's unconditional love, limitless grace, triumphant mercy to a bigger global audience.